What's going on in my city?
Absolutely.
Turn left onto Walbridge sidewalk. Turn right onto Walbridge sidewalk.
Yes.
So that project.
Fireside. Either one works.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started. It's like class. All right, everybody's so excited to see each other, which is wonderful. But welcome to NC State, for those of you who are joining us from off campus. Welcome to the Entrepreneurship Initiative, for those of you who are joining us from campus and from off campus. I am really excited to host and to welcome you all to today's event. We are excited to be hosting today's conversation with Dr. Henry McKoy as part of NC State's Energy Week. If I haven't yet had a chance to meet you, my name is Jessica Yinka-Thomas. I'm an associate professor of the practice in the Poole College of Management here at NC State. And I'm also the director of our Business Sustainability Collaborative. And so that's our academic initiative within the business school, very much focused on engagement, so engagement with the business community, engagement with government, and today's event is part of that work that we should do to try to connect and create a bridge between academia and the real world. Our focus is also on translating and sharing applied research related to sustainability, as well as embedding sustainability across our curriculum at the business school. And I'm really excited to announce a new certificate that we just launched a few months ago, a 12-credit graduate business sustainability certificate that we launched in collaboration with the College of Natural Resources. And so open to graduate students across NC State, as well as non-degree seeking students. And part of our larger efforts really to prepare the next generation of business leaders who are going to drive that sustainable change that we need to be able to address the broad range of challenges that we face, both locally and globally. And so I think that's one of the reasons why today's conversation, and we have two guests, as you'll see up here, who I'll introduce shortly, to really have a conversation about the urgency and the opportunity to accelerate our transition to clean energy. And we are all very aware, and we are being reminded, right, regularly about the urgency of this issue, as I know many of us and many of our families and our communities have seen the impact of Hurricane Helene, the impact on loss of life, the impact on businesses, the impact on our infrastructure. And so I think this is a critical conversation that we are going to have an opportunity to have to really connect, make a connection between what is the role of government, right? What is the role of business? How can we create a collaboration to really be able to address this really significant challenge that we face in climate change and the role of the energy sector in doing that. And I can think of no better place to have this conversation here, right, in this Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at NC State. What we are learning is, and what you all are learning along with us, or I'm being reminded, we have many hubs of innovation and entrepreneurship across campus, and some of you have explored one of them. You get to explore another. We've got some folks, there was a slight miscommunication about the location. We've just got too much going on campus, so we're expecting a few more folks to be joining us. Welcome. And so I'm going to give Malhar an opportunity to introduce Henry in a little bit more detail, but I just want to say welcome, Henry. Thank you so much for making the time to come here to NC State to speak with us. Henry is a celebrated son of North Carolina, grew up just down the road in Fayetteville. We had an opportunity to first meet 17 years ago as we were discussing, as we were preparing for today's conversation, when I was actually down the road. So Henry has a lot of blue, represents a few different shades of blue.
No, really, mostly light blue.
Mostly like, all right.
Don't get caught up.
And that's where we first met. So I was actually at UNC Kenan-Flagler before NC State. Henry served on an advisory board for a business accelerator focused on sustainable entrepreneurship way back 17 years ago, right? And this is still an early concept, and that accelerator, I think, really helped to build and support a lot of the sustainable businesses that we see here in North Carolina today. To now joining us from DC and parts all over the country as an appointee in the Biden administration in some really critical roles as it relates to advancing clean energy. And so I'm going to introduce Malhar. Malhar is an alum from our Jenkins MBA program. And whenever I have an opportunity to uplift and showcase our students and our alumni, I'm always delighted to do that. And so Malhar is a program manager at John Deere, as well as an entrepreneur and innovator himself. And so the CEO and founder of microWatt, so new startup focused on working with companies on carbon accounting strategy. And so Malhar and Henry are going to have some prepared remarks, some prepared conversation, and then we will open it up for some Q&A and some discussion from the audience. And then I encourage everyone to stick around for lunch. I'll have an opportunity to have a networking lunch afterwards. Before I hand it over to Malhar, I just want to thank our Business Sustainability Collaborative team. I think they're out there trying to find more folks who might be in other parts of campus. And also thank the Entrepreneurship Initiative for hosting us here in this beautiful space. And thank both Henry and Malhar for making the time. But with that, and thank you all for making the time to come out and join us for this conversation. And for some of you braving the trek across campus, we are delighted to have you here for this really important conversation. So I'll hand it over to Malhar to kick us off. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for the kind introduction. And I'm not a guest here. Raleigh Founded has been a home, being part of the program, Jenkins MBA program, or just being involved in entrepreneurship in the Raleigh area. Everyone knows Raleigh Founded, and this is a perfect location, right here on campus. And then one thing Jessica mentioned, right, uplifting students. She's very good at that, and that is the reason some of us sit here. So helped us coach through the program and helped us understand or bring us to events that expose us to whatever is going on in the community. So thank you for that. Starting off, right, she introduced Dr. McKoy here, just a brief introduction on him. So as she mentioned, he's currently the senior advisor to the U.S. Undersecretary for Science and Innovation within the Department of Energy, and previously served as the inaugural director of the Office of State and Community Energy Program. So I'll kick off with, so within the DOE, right, you were the inaugural director for these community energy programs. Let's start with that, right? Like, so can you please tell us more about what the office does and perhaps why was yours the inaugural position?
Yeah, well, thank you. Very happy to be here, and Malhar and Jessica for the invitation and the chance to come and sit. And when we talked, the format is if it's a problem, it's my fault because we were talking and I spent a lot of time traveling and talking and things of that nature and I said it might be good to have a conversation, right? We're at kind of a very interesting time in the administration, to say the least, right? I mean, and to this point, it's been a number of years since I've been in this role, and I feel like it could be a good time to reflect some, right? I mean, and thinking about what we set out to do, what we did, what we didn't get done, and things like that. So I felt like it could be a good conversation to have. I want to thank all of you all for being out, and I know I think one of the great things perhaps of having such a busy schedule, you really don't look at things until like the last moment to get where you need to get to. So I don't know where where your other folks were, but since I didn't look at things till this morning, and do that, then I ended up here and had gotten a invitation to visit my friend Tom Darden's company up on the 3rd floor. So I appreciate y'all who weathered the having to get over here and seeing all you good friends and long-term friends is wonderful. But I'll answer your question. So if you go back and just from a reflective standpoint, if you go back to the first year of the administration, should have been 2021, President Biden had put forth what was called Build Back Better. And that was kind of a big push early on. It was this $3 trillion initiative to look at social infrastructure, meaning like things like how do you make sure that communities are stronger? I mean, everything from daycare and investments in family and things of that nature to kind of physical infrastructure. And so that was that $3 trillion vision, but that ended up being in a lot of ways dead on arrival from Congress. And so what had to come up, what came out of that was this $1 trillion infrastructure, what became known as the bipartisan infrastructure law. The technical term for it is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So everything that, it's all political, right? So you have to figure out a way to include investment in the title, jobs in the title, all that stuff. But we call it primarily bipartisan infrastructure law, because you need to have bipartisan there as well, right? So that $1 trillion that got passed in November of 2021 basically laid the foundation for this notion that we should be investing in infrastructure, meaning, the kind of roads, bridges, all those kind of things to think about, but in combination with climate, dealing with climate change. And so the $1 trillion that was set aside had that kind of combination of how do we invest in physical infrastructure, but also do so in a way that is reflective of the urgency that climate poses to us. So once that $1 trillion was set aside in November 2021, they then had to figure out a way to deploy the resources. And there was no kind of, historical vehicle that had those two things together. So they created an office in the White House around infrastructure and climate at the joint, but they still needed a deployment arm. So they looked around and figured out, well, where does this make the most sense at? And because energy is such a huge part of course, the effort to address climate change, it made sense to create a new office, a whole new undersecretary within Department of Energy around infrastructure. And so my office became one of the offices that was created under this new infrastructure pillar. And a lot of the money ended up being divided between us and Department of Energy and some in EPA. You heard of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and things of that nature. But just back to this, so I was called by the administration to ask if I would be interested in coming and setting up this new office focused around community energy. And I was at the time I was kind of deep into semester at North Carolina Central, and I was trying to for a professor, you look forward to summer vacations, right? And so that's kind of my priority right at that moment. I talked to the White House around January of 2022, and the White House kind of operates like they contact you, don't contact us, we'll contact you. So they talk to you and then they disappear for a while. So when they show back up, it was the end of the semester. I'm trying to grade papers because I'm trying to get to summer vacation. And it was funny because I get this cryptic email that says, did you get our previous email? And I hadn't. I mean, and so what ended up happening, the email was in my spam folder. And it was the White House saying, hey, and if you ever get I'm probably telling what I shouldn't be telling now, but if you ever get an email from the White House, they they have a lot of bravado to them, right? Like, we're the White House and we want to know if you're interested in this role. If you're, if you are, then let us know what you're gonna be doing for the next 36 hours so we can talk to you. If you're not, then basically have a good life, but don't tell anybody else about this email ever. Or that's basically how it is, right? So it's kind of funny that I get the second email and say, hey, did you see my first email? I was like, so that kind of set the tone, and we came to an agreement, and I was trying to get them to not pull me on until at the end of my summer vacation. So I'm like, well, because I'm still getting paid for, but we had to go and get to work. And in July 2022, I went into Department of Energy to set up this new office. What we had at the time was basically all we had was $6 billion. I don't mean that at all. I mean, but we didn't have a team. We had $6 billion, and we had to figure out how to build a team around that. And so I got there in July of 2022. We had $6 billion that we needed to deploy. 3 weeks later, the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and I got another $10 billion. So now we had $16 billion that we had to deploy. So over the course of from that moment on for the next year or so, we hired 300 or so people. We took that $16 billion and we had to create 28 different programs in the office to deploy those resources. And it was the first, it's the first not only office in America, but also globally that has tried to take a comprehensive look at the intersection between energy, climate reduction, climate greenhouse gas reduction, and community. And so those 28 programs touch everything you can think of, from workforce development to we set up green banks in every state. We rebates, all 50 states, 5 territories, DC, just everything you can think of. We invest in states, we invest in local governments, about 5,000 grantees to think about this, everything from electric vehicle charging to what are all the different points around, energy in the community that we can think of. And I finished with this. All that also you have to tie in. Keep in mind the bill got passed in November 2021. This is still during the time that there's still a lot of attention around the murder of George Floyd and the impacts of that. And so President Biden, the day after he got to office, he signed something called executive order called Justice 40 executive order. And Justice 40 essentially says that 40% of the benefits from any of the legislation gets passed to go to historically disadvantaged communities. And so we got $16 billion, we got 28 programs, and all that has to go through the lens of how do you make sure that it's not just we're not just deploying resources, but we're doing so in an equitable way. And so that became the charge is, instead of just the idea of how do we get this money out as fast as we can, how do you get the money out as fast as you can with equity at the center of everything you do? And, that is certainly easier said than done.
I guess I'll maybe unpack something, right? So you mentioned, so there's obviously, when you're setting up a brand new office, right, there is no precedent, right, to what has been done previously. So
hello, everybody, I hope to join this.
Everybody's saying, hey.
So there's obviously no precedent, and I'm sure there were challenges, right, with figuring out where to even get started. But then at the same time, I'm sure there were opportunities, right, about to do things that were previously not considered, right? What were perhaps some of those things that we were now able to do because of this new office?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. I think in a lot of ways, I feel like I've had a lot of experience doing different things, right? In terms of the scale of it, right? I mean, it's one of those kind of things where, billions of dollars is still a lot of money, but this is my $4 billion organization I've ran. And so, I kind of feel like, you get to a point where you feel like that at least for me, I feel like that my life, the things that I experience and the things I'm exposed to, I've been very blessed. I've been very lucky. I mean, they have to mean something, right? I mean, there's got to be a reason why I'm doing this and this and that. And so, honestly, the Office of State Community Program, which we call SCEP, really had a lot of parallels to, I used to be the Assistant Secretary of Commerce here in North Carolina under Beverly Perdue. And I was joined her administration during the first term of the Obama administration. And that was, if you remember, when basically the housing crisis happened, the collapse and all those things. So you had all these recovery dollars. And so there's a lot of parallel to that, right? I mean, when I was Assistant Secretary of Commerce, I mean, we invested all across the state. We invested in small business and in communities and things of that nature. So, you just look for models that you can pull from. That's essentially what I did. I thought about my banking days. I always tell folks to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So my kind of hammer is the investment space, right? Banking or public sector, private sector, philanthropic, whatever it is. And so I found this to be a incredible opportunity to think differently about this, and particularly with the justice piece in there and the equity piece, because that's not always something that you have as a mandate to do, right? And so a lot of times, for me, I mean, that's been a passion of mine. So you're fighting folks who aren't, necessarily as committed to it as you are. When you have something that says, hey, that's a part of this process, then it actually, gave me a certain level of, kind of buoyancy to say, okay, that's going to be a driving force of this. And so a key part of thinking about standing us up was, how do we do it in a way that does operate differently than we have before, right? How do we look broadly speaking? Now, keep in mind, the other side, I think, that is important in this, think about this moment in time, is the fact that, we were recovering from COVID in a lot of ways. And so historically, in order to stand up this office and to staff the office, we would have essentially, you reach out to people, you say, hey, here's a job, here's an opportunity. If you want it, you have to move to DC. We were not under those same constraints at this point. One way we were trying to figure out how to get people to come back to work. So I'm spending my time building up an office physical space, and well, how do we do this in a way that engages people? So I actually had my chief of staff, and we put together a plan to build something like a lab, right? How do we create a situation where people actually want to come into work because they have access to things that they don't have at home, right? I remember we have this conversation about how to get people back to work, and one day the president was saying, well, hey, we want to get everybody back to work, but then the next day it was like, well, we don't want people to feel like, they've been very productive at home. We don't want them to feel like we're kind of take that away. And so, you're trying to find all these ways to incent people to come back to work. So I'm building this lab that, has all this technology, and, let's make sure they have access to things. And so these 28 different programs. The other part of this is that for me, I've always been very interested in this notion of complexity science, right? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, instead of all these little separate categories. And so part of this was like, well, we got 28 different offices, 28 different programs under basically 5 different offices inside of my shop. How do we make this collaboration work holistically? When you look at a community, you should be able to look at that community and think about, well, what are the building blocks that made that community strong, as opposed to just showing up with some grant program. Say, hey, here's a grant program, here's the money, apply for it. I mean, how do you meet the community where they are? Because every community is not at the same place. And so it became a matter of changing the mindset of how we actually do the investments, right? How do we make sure that we're connecting to communities where they are? How do we make sure that we are making the access to this capital really attainable to folks who historically have not had access to it? Because you put anything you want on paper, but the reality of it is that if you go throughout history without ever inviting some folks to the table, right, and say, here's resources, and then one day you show up and say, hey, guess what, we got all this money that you can apply for. But you know what, you really got to do it the same way we've always done it. I mean, that is not equity from that standpoint. So it really became a matter of thinking about how do you build something from the ground up. And for me, as a political appointee, I mean, I know my days are numbered, right? So there's no doubt about that. And so for me, it became a matter of how do I put together a team that will outlast me? How do I build a culture? So that became, I mean, simply the focus, right? How do you build a vision out that people can look at and be inspired by it? How do you create the workplace that folks feel like they have some agency in the work that they do? And how do we bring their passions to the table as well. And that really became the driver. And I will say this because it's important to me as well. And it goes back to when I talked about my days in Department of Commerce here. A lot of the work that I've done from the government standpoint has been focused on how do you strengthen communities? How do you lift up people? How do you lift up places? How do you do these kind of things? But also, I want people to realize, I mean, that's real work, right? I mean, not only is it hard work, but it's head work, right? I mean, this is not easy. I mean, you know, and I want people to realize that. So, and I want people to respect it. I mean, I think that's the key, is that you respect the idea that somebody wakes up every single day and tries to make the world better in innovative ways. And so when I got the Department of Energy, I have $16 billion, right? And I tell you a secret, you know, you have that kind of money, you know, all your jokes are funnier, you know. People love to smile at you. I mean, you know, it's like, I don't have a loss of friends when you have that kind of money, right? People show up at the door, just all kind. I will have people coming from all kind of places, you know, hey, how you doing? Can we talk? And so, and part of it, I because it's money, right? It's a lot of money, and people, you know, they need money for their goals. But the other part of it is, I do feel like that people have an inherent desire to want to do good in the world, right? And, you know, we got you know, I said the $1 trillion for the bipartisan infrastructure law. It was like $370 billion for the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's money everywhere. But, you know, people love the idea that we were there as a anchor for building strong communities. So I think people came to the table saying, hey, I want to have a part of that because it makes me feel good. But I also want them to know that, you know what, you know, this is not the welfare office, right? I mean, this is like real work, and it's hard work, and we should be bringing our greatest minds to the table. We should bring the latest, greatest technology to the table. And so I demanded that we have respect for the work that we do amongst my colleagues, and particularly DOE. Now, the Department of Energy is historically been research and development, right? I mean, you know, you got the 17 national labs, and you know, I know where I'm known, but it's funny because when I got the call and I went into to DOE, I didn't. I mean, you know, I've known Department of Energy, and I've done, you know, gotten grants from them, but the first day in the office, Department of Energy, if you ever go to DC, it's on Independence Avenue. It's right. People really like it. It's right in front of the International Spy Museum, right? So that people find that really cool. Place called the Font Plaza near the wharf. So I go, but it looks like something. I mean, but it is something. But like, it looks like something from the 1950s. So I mean, big concrete building and things of that nature. So I'm in the office first day, and my chief of staff is there, and he had been there a week before I was, because whenever they called me to ask me to join the team, I already had a vacation plan, right? And I was going. My son was in LA. He had just took an internship. I was going out to see him, and they were trying to get me to come on that week before. I was like, well, you got kind of two options here, right? I said, you know, you can pay me to be on vacation because, you know, on my first week, because I'm going to LA, and I was essentially saying, well, whatever's been going on before now, I don't think a week is going to make a difference. So I came in a week out. So my chief of staff had already been there a week, and it was DOE's. I didn't know at the time, but the food closer by, but I didn't see anything, right? So I said, well, let me grab something to eat for lunch and kind of keep on working. And I said, well, I told my chief of staff, I said, I know I saw a snack machine somewhere, right? I said, well, let me see if I can go find that snack machine. He said, oh, you don't need a snack machine. He said, go downstairs, and there's one of those rooms, the next floor down, that you know, you go in there, you buy the food, they got your camera, make sure you don't steal it and all that kind of stuff. So I said, okay, so I go downstairs to the 6th floor, and and that's all he told me was on the 6th floor, right? So I go downstairs on the 6th floor, and you know that old Bugs Bunny things, I should have took that left in Albuquerque. Well, I took the left instead of the right. The snack one was right there on the right, but I took the left because I didn't know. So I'm wandering around the hallway, and I do kind of the stereotypical male thing, right? I'm wandering around, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not gonna ask anybody. I'm just looking confident like I know where I'm going. So I'm wandering around this big concrete building, not knowing where I'm going, just trying to act like I know where I'm going. And I walk around the corner, and I see this huge Monteith with Robert Oppenheimer and the folks who were involved in the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. And it's at that moment I realized, wow, that is this place, right? And so historically, Department of Energy has been research and development. With this money that came in, we have an RD&D now, research, development, demonstration, and deployment. So I said all that to say that the key thing for me was to show that we should get as much respect for the work that we do to try to build up communities and strengthen communities as anybody else should across the whole enterprise.
It's Energy Week, right? And so I'm transitioning a bit into just the push for renewable energy, right? So some data, this was coincidental, just last week I was reading this article that talked about really, so you're talking about bringing the pieces together with your office, right? So there's the clean energy piece, and then there's how do you do greenhouse gas emission reduction. One piece of data, right, that I saw was, this is from 2022. So China is a global leader in producing greenhouse gas emissions, followed by the US and India, and then the EU, right? So US, India, and EU combined produce less greenhouse gas emissions than China does by itself, right? But at the same time, they're also leading the world in terms of renewable energy production. In China, they installed in 2023, right? They installed 62% of the world's non-hydroelectric, right? So that is solar, wind, and in fact, last year they deployed more solar than US has done ever within 1 year, right? And I guess I'm trying to understand. So as Jessica also mentioned, right? So events such as Hurricane Lee make the urgency for action, right, in terms of how do we deploy more renewable energy, even more urgent, right? And so what are, I guess, some of the things that perhaps they're, from China's perspective, right, I can also understand that they're politically different than we are, right? But if you look at EU, India, some of these places, right, like what are they doing that we can replicate over here? Both from renewable energy production standpoint, but also resiliency, right? Grid resiliency standpoint. So what are some of the innovations that maybe the government has, or initiatives that the government has done, but at the same time, I'm from the business school, so I'm interested in figuring out, right, what kind of role can businesses play, right, in fostering innovation and making the grid more resilient?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple of questions in there. I mean, one is about kind of from a government standpoint, one is about kind of corporations, things of that nature. I mean, they all kind of work together. I'll give you one context. So, you know, I talked about the $16 billion that we have within the Office of State Community Program, but I was also early on asked by the secretary to put together a new office that would be kind of, you know, umbrella office for the overall DOE, and thinking about how do we think strategically about how all the pieces really do work together. So that became the Office of Community Engagement. And the idea of the Office of Community Engagement was twofold. One was to think about how do we connect all of the different offices. I have one office, right? It has 28 different programs in it. DOE has a writ large, probably around 200 different offices, right? I mean, everything from hydrogen to nuclear to, I mean, everything you can think of, right? We have 17 national labs, and as I mentioned before, the national labs grew out of the whole atomic creation of atomic bomb, and about 3 of the labs still do that kind of stuff. So, you know, the place that's in the office beside me, the NNSA, like that's the place you walk by and your phone dies, and like all you know, everything goes silent, and you know whatever they do over there. But you know that $100 billion, we had $100 billion across the Department of Energy writ large, and so part of the creation of the Office of Community Engagement was to figure out how do we connect communities to manufacturing to all these other elements across DOE in a way that makes sense. And then the administration, the president asked if we would take a lead in creating a interagency working group. So my team also had the interagency working group. So there's about $500 billion across federal government focused just on climate. So you had $500 billion that from everybody from HUD to Department of Transportation so we had to coordinate that, right? So part of this, and I say this kind of in the reverse, part of this is that we are working very closely with our allies to think about, you know, how do we learn from one another, right? So on one level, my office was the first of its kind created on the planet. So part of this is working with our allies to say, well, you know, if you want to really think strategically about how to pull all these pieces together, you know, this is what we're trying to do, things of that nature. Certainly, there are other places that we're learning from. So we spend a lot of time from a global standpoint. I will say this: one of the things that you know we had to deal with on a regular basis is the fact that you know, for every action, there's a reaction. So we have these goals that you hear about, trying to reduce certain greenhouse gas by 2035 or 2050 and go to zero energy and things like that. And, you set forth a strategy. I mean, the whole investment scheme that has been put together, the whole structure, all that is based on these goals. Then guess what happens? Artificial intelligence and data centers. And they run energy up incredibly by incredible amounts, right? They weren't counted in kind of the estimation before. And then you end up with these kind of I say technology wars, right? Between where you create the chips. So the Chips and Science Act that was part of the administration said, well, you could only get chips from the U.S. and certain things. And so it's a very dynamic kind of element. And so corporations, I mean, certainly corporations can play important roles. I did a lecture a little while ago over at Keenan Flagler and, an MBA program. And part of the conversation is really that, these are the leaders of the future, right? And so you have to make decisions about how you're going to kind of organize your businesses, how are you going to innovate, how are you going to think differently, because doing the same thing may be easier, but it's not necessarily better. I'm saying, Eric Henry back here from TS Designs. Eric came to me, he was telling me about, like the latest, greatest things that you need to be doing to think about how do you dye your t-shirt, right? I mean, something very simple that we don't think about, and I want to say send me a video that I was watching that showed me like just how terrible t-shirts can be if you don't do them right for the environment, right? And so I think that we're all learning aspects of this as we go. Anybody that's in this space knows that you're trying to figure things out. They don't always work right, and you got to be able to iterate. And so I think that politics always comes into play, right? So who you mad with today versus who you mad with yesterday, and who can you work, who's your ally today, and things like all that kind of stuff. And it's just hard. I mean, I think that's what comes down to, that they're trying to reduce greenhouse gas while increasing economic output, creating jobs. All those things are challenging, and certainly there are countries that we work with in order to make sure that we are at the forefront. And I feel like this because I think this is one of those areas that really, it speaks to your question about what some folks are doing and we're not doing. So nuclear, right? So nuclear is one of those technologies that are seen in very different ways. I think about, when I think about nuclear, people think about 3 Mile Island and the reactor meltdown. We got the Sharon Harris plant here. I went to South Africa and I was riding down the highway and they had like 3 big nuclear reactors there, right? I remember I was out at Idaho National Lab and the scientists were showing me these little tiny nuclear reactors, right? Saying, oh yeah, everybody have this in their backyard. And I was like, really? I said, well, how do folks think about that? He said, oh, they love it. So I'm talking about science. I said, no, not the scientists. How do the actual, like regular everyday people? But, you think about nuclear. You do think about the 3 Mile Island, right? You think about Homer Simpson, right? Springfield, these 4-eyed fish and stuff, right? That's what you think about, regardless of kind of how it plays out. But there's nuclear reactors are coming online in other places, and so I know that in some of these the funding that we have nuclear. As far as that, I just saw, I think Microsoft just entered into an agreement to kind of bring back online, like I think 3 Mile Island. So, I mean, it's happening. You have to ask yourself, well, do we follow that path? Because nuclear is clean. I mean, so yeah, it's an iterative process, and it's hard work, and but you want to make sure, which is part of the reason why we create this interagency working group and these things, because you want your right hand to know what your left hand is doing, right? At least, even if your right and left hand are in conflict, I mean, you want to at least know what it's doing so you can try to work through that. And I think that's what we got to focus on. And again, I reiterate that the data centers coming online for AI has been one of the biggest challenges. I mean, we get folks like Sam Altman from OpenAI and other Google and Meta, and everybody shows up at our door to say, well, hey, we need energy. At the end of the day, because, when Duke Energy builds a plant or when they run their plant, they're trying to figure out how renewable, reliable and cheap energy per se. We say, well, look, you need to put some renewables in there, right? So now you got to keep it clean and inexpensive with the addition of renewables, and it just changes the calculus of the work. And you want your lights to come on when you flip them on, right? So
I guess, and so do some of these businesses who are working on artificial intelligence and building all these data centers, do they play a role in helping us build that renewable energy infrastructure or just energy infrastructure that they need, right, in order to keep their lights on and continue to develop their own companies?
yeah, I mean, I remember I was over at Duke, the MBA program. This is years ago, and I remember having a conversation with students at the time. And Duke is, I've said this publicly, so it's not anything that hasn't been said, right? So I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill as an undergrad. My wife graduated from UNC Chapel Hill as an undergrad. Both my kids went to UNC Chapel Hill, right? So I raised my kids like I hate Duke, right? I mean, that's kind of what that's kind of how the advance went, right? Now, but I have a master's degree from Duke, right? But what was happening was that when I left business school at Carolina, this is before Jessica Thomas shows up in our life, right? So when I was at Carolina in the business school, it was all about business, right? I mean, it's like business is set up to make money, and that's it. There was no talk about, you start talking about like climate or social, man, they look at you like you had three heads, right? And that was just how it was. I mean, I got out of business school in 1995, right? Well, Duke actually was at the forefront of social entrepreneurship. And so they started doing all this kind of really cool stuff with social entrepreneurship. So I was literally preaching "Hey Duke" at the house and sneaked over to work at, do some stuff with Duke, during the day. But I mentioned that because the students told me one time, they said what really attracted them to social entrepreneurship was it's like playing a video game, but at a higher level, right? I still got to figure out how to make money. I still got to figure out those business fundamentals, but I need to also figure out how to do so in a way that makes a difference and makes an impact. So I think the same thing here, right, is that it's like, how do you think about in a startup or whatever the case, creating a business that has impact from the start, and you build that into your DNA. I spend a lot of times talking to founders and others, in Silicon Valley and other places, saying, well, look, you don't need to be thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion later. I mean, you need to think about it at the very beginning, right? You don't build a company and say, oh, we're going to deal with that in 5 years. Put it in from the get-go, right? That's one of the things I've been most proud of is the office I built in DOE, is just thinking about that from the get-go. So I think from an entrepreneurship standpoint, I mean, you have to bake these things in. It can't be kind of the tragedy of the commons where somebody else will do this, right? I'm gonna just operate like I operate, but somebody else will figure out, dealing with climate, or they deal with equity, all these kind of things. And I've long held this dream, really, of North Carolina, my home state, in a lot of ways being the place where those pieces can all come together, as opposed to just simply being about money. I remember I was in Silicon Valley just years ago, and I was meeting with a guy named Emmett Carson, who was the head of, and I think he probably still is the head of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, right? I'm thinking, everybody thinking, well, you got to be rolling in money. I mean, you're sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley, all this stuff. He's like, no, actually, it's the total opposite. He said, people don't come to Silicon Valley to invest in community. They come to Silicon Valley to get rich. And so they're not thinking about some community foundation. I think ultimately Zuckerberg gave him $100 million. I mean, but that's kind of like pennies in Silicon Valley, right? So I say all that to say that I still hold out a dream that someplace, it'd be great if it was here, really brought all those pieces together. I think that just kind of B Corp work is incredibly important. I think having people who really care about the world that are housed there is important. But I really would just love to see a scenario where the same way people think about New York as being the capital of money, capital of capital, Silicon Valley being the capital of kind of innovation and technology. Nashville, the capital of country music, I guess, Orlando and the child family friend. I mean, what does it look like if this was the capital of that integration between impact and business and enterprise? And so then you have coursework that does that. You have science and technology that supports that. You have investment capital that does that. So, I mean, that's what I think the opportunity is. I think there's still a place that that needs to be the hub of that kind of work.
We have about a few minutes for questions. So any questions from the audience? First.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ian. I'm from Durham, actually. I went to school right down the street from Duke. But so I'm doing chemical engineering with like interest in sustainability and energy. But I'm also interested in sales engineering. So I'm just wondering, like, mentally throughout your career, I'm assuming like you got more cars, but how did you deal with just managing that amount of money, managing $16 billion? Were you ever did you ever have doubts, or like, what was it like up here?
I mean, I think, again, I think if you, so, they always talk about the idea of my friends will say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, right? And so, I mean, I've spent a long time in banking and finance and things of that nature. I think, if you, part of this is preparation, right? It's preparing when even before you have the opportunity. So, big numbers don't scare me. Now, if somebody gave me $16 billion, when I was, 20 years old, I don't know. But it's been an interesting, journey from that standpoint. And, I started out of banking in my early 20s, and I ended up managing operations for the bank that's now Truist. That was about $3.5 billion by the time I was on the 24, 25. And then by the time I was 30, I ended up having the opportunity to lead a part of our bank that had managed $50 billion for our capital. I mean, so, you kind of get used to that, and it became more important to me to think about how do you take that, what is an awesome responsibility, and make sure that you're doing the right thing with it, right? Because I will say this, and this is what I learned from my days in banking. Money doesn't solve all problems. I mean, money can solve money problems, but at the end of the day, I don't think our problems are because we don't have enough money. I think they end up being about how we invest that money. You can't invest in, I'd say this kind of quickly, so we can get to other questions, but even in the work now, right? I'm the one to push against the idea that if you go to a community and, we do everything from investing in what's called weatherization, which is making low-income households more efficient. You make them warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer, things of that nature, to, huge investments. And you can't go to one community and you go on one side of town and you say, oh, we're going to have a nice little, photo op while we were Miss Rose, while we just changed out her thermostat and all this stuff, and she's gonna save $10 a month, and wow, that's fantastic. I mean, every dollar counts, right? But if you didn't leave from there and go across town, you do a ribbon cut for some $400 million factory, those things aren't equal. I mean, they just aren't. I mean, I'm not saying don't do, Aunt Rose's house, but one is creating wealth in significant ways that can be generational, that can be, kind of dynastic, and another not. So you got to find a way. What I've always thought about in terms of these numbers is that we should be able to invest in ways that where the externalities of the investment, whether they're good or bad, follow equal on everybody, right? I mean, people should get good, they should get the bad, but it shouldn't be that one community gets all the good and another community gets all the bad. And so I say all that to say that, I mean, whenever I started this path and I was reading books, I was reading all kind of books and, running up credit card bills at Barnes and Nobles and stuff like that. I didn't know where this was going. I just had interest. I mean, as they say, for me, I've changed. I've worked in a lot of different industries. I've worked in a lot of different sectors. So I've done a lot of different things. But what's never changed is really been my passion and my purpose. Those things maintained across these different areas, and that allows you to make connections where you wouldn't make them otherwise. So, so I got faith in you, Ian, that you can manage billions of dollars. So Zach saying that.
Thank you all for being here. I had a question about iteration that really resonated. what's one way that y'all iterated from what you learned from the ERA funding, and then one thing that you would do if you were to go back again with the funding and iterate one more time?
Okay. Well, if y'all don't know Zach Kingery, his parents are, Maria and Bob are the founders of Southern Energy Management. So, one of the leading, solar companies around back in the day. I mean, there's a lot of folks that have been around a long time, right? Tom's been trying to figure this stuff out. And so, but Zach, to your question, the part of the idea is to keep on learning, right? And so I say one of the things certainly that, so there's a couple of things, and sometimes you have to figure out how to kind of balance these out. So with the recovery funds, one thing that you have within government, or I'm a political appointee, right? So I'm here and I'm gonna be gone, but folks who are government career folks, there's a certain PTSD from our time, right? Because you got all this money, you hired up a whole bunch of people, and then at some point the money just disappeared. And so now you gotta lay off a whole bunch of people, and you gotta figure that out, right? So even today, you're dealing with some of that stressor from the past, saying, well, we don't want this to be another R. So, I'm in there like, hey, look, we need to do this, we need to get this thing said. And folks are like, this is what happened in R. So I think part of it is I mean, and you have to take that, you have to take that seriously. The way I responded to it was like, well, let's show that we're so valuable to the ecosystem that Congress, regardless of who's in the big chair, who's in the seats, decides that this work should keep going, right? I mean, because the work that we do, it goes all the way down to the local, real deep community level, and that need is there regardless. I mean, people, the idea that you somehow, everybody knows how to make a transition to clean energy is just not the reality. And the other part about that is that, I mean, I have these very interesting conversations with our scientists is that, physics and all that stuff can take you so far, but at the end of the day, there's a social component to this as well. Like as they always say, my first introduction to lower my carbon footprint, all that stuff from my dad, who used to say, is there a reason why that light is on? Look at some of that refrigerator. I mean, but people have there's habits you have to have in order to do this work. And so I think I try to bring social scientists and all that kind of stuff to the table as well. One of the interesting things that certainly has been an impactful is that we just had the COVID work, right? And so before I went into government, I actually had, I've been publishing a book called The Pandemic Divide. And I was actually doing a chapter on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on African-American businesses. And so I did this whole layout. I looked at the data from the payroll protection program. Basically, the sum of it is that the way the payroll protection was done from a company standpoint, it wasn't really equal in a lot of ways. And so basically what it did, it actually exacerbated gaps. And I mean, it really did, it created an even bigger chasm in terms of investments. So part of what I became the lesson I took from that was that as I go into this new role where I got a lot more resources, I need to make sure that the investments that we make aren't making broader gaps, making gaps that are already bigger. And so, I mean, those are kind of lessons that I took from, some of the past things. The other thing is that our Inspector General, man, they would come at you and they say, well, look, in the COVID funds, these are all the ways that fraud happened. These are all the people that took money they shouldn't have took it, all this stuff. And they're like, look, we're gonna make sure that doesn't happen again. And so they get on you about ensuring that you have checks and balances in place that ensure that you learn those lessons from before. So what I did was I ended up hiring a guy actually from SAS. He was really an expert in data analytics and artificial intelligence, all this kind of stuff, to say, well, how do we, we're collecting all this data from folks anyway. How do we use it for more than just oversight? How do we use it to become more intelligent about the work that we're doing? And so for me, it became, okay, how do we use something that we're already getting to make us better in terms of the work? And all that comes from just past lessons that you have.
Time for one more question. I saw your hand first.
Okay, good to hear me as always. So it's hard for us to see down here on the earth the impact or what has flowed down and what has trickled down from what you're doing. Can you think of some examples of something that we can look to and see that's happening, here in North Carolina that's a direct result of what you're doing up there?
Thanks, Kate. Well, so here's the reality is that we have, I mean, my office alone, and this is just one office, right? I mean, we've given probably, I think maybe $400 million to North Carolina to do work. And so, and part of this is that, that research, development, demonstration, deployment, that deployment side is not the easiest thing to do, right? Because there's a whole lot of factors that go into this whole clean energy transition. You gotta get the money, the investment to make it right. But this work really happens at the local and state level. And so, my team, we would invest in all the 50 states, the 5 territories, DC, about, 2,500 local governments. But when it comes out of our shop, then it goes through some political process. So here's an example. Politics does play into it sometimes. We had $350 million that we were given to Florida, and Governor Ron DeSantis said, we're not gonna take it. Well, look, it's funny because, so it was around, we have these rebates. So one of the things, so North Carolina will get, or have gotten $300-some million for clean energy rebates here in the state, which means that on one part of it, which getting your house upgraded from an energy standpoint, there's no income kind of situation there. I mean, anybody from low income to up income can take advantage of those programs. The lower income get actual direct cash, the higher income, the lower and middle income get direct cash, the higher income get tax credits. There are other programs that just low income. So that money is coming to the state. We made $165 million for something called Solar Crawl through EPA's Greenhouse Gas Fund. That's coming to the state. So there's a lot of these things. It's really about figuring out how to, make it work. So I mentioned the Florida thing because at the end of the day, even though we allocated the funds, the governor said he wasn't going to take them. Now, it ended up being where, I started getting all these emails and letters from people in Florida saying, our governor, is nuts. Give us, is there a way for you to get us the money without going to the governor? I had a little Rhode Island, which is about that big, saying, give us the money, right? And, all this money is really fractional of what you need. I mean, the idea is to make investments that will allow the public sector, whoever, to say, well, hey, that's a good investment. Let's put money in to do more. So everything is a fractional of what it really takes to do the work. I was thinking Rhode Island, we gave Rhode Island all of Florida money. They actually could do everything from that standpoint. So I say, in North Carolina, it's the office of the energy office here in North Carolina that gets pretty much most of our money. So if you reach out to them, I mean, they should be able to tell you where, at this point, should be billions of dollars that have come to North Carolina to do energy projects, to invest in upgrades in households and things of that nature. And so it really is it's really all around you. But we have challenges with states who are not as I say boisterous about promoting something that, say, the Biden administration put forth, or so, but the money's here. I mean, and I encourage folks to, go to your, I know it was Diener, it's now the, I think Division of Environmental Quality or something like that, over at, in the administration, they got the money. So there's a lot of it.
Thank you.
I guess lastly, I want to close with a call to action, right? So for some of the students here or alumni like myself, or anyone who has aspirations to be perhaps someone like you or future business leaders, what role do you think they can play in the future and how can they prepare for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly work to be done. I mean, there's always more that can be done. There's always new ways to think about things. There's a whole lot of folks who are taking up the mantle of trying to figure out these challenges. But we still know, I mean, that there's so much energy that comes from, future generations on how this work gets done. So I would encourage folks to really think about, explore what has been done and think about what has been done. I still buy into the notion that that's at least credited with Albert Einstein saying that, imagination is more important than knowledge, right? I mean, a lot of my life has been about imagining me in a place that I certainly didn't start in. And it's also about preparation, right? You do the work, not always knowing how it's going to play out. Like I said, when I was reading books about, grids and physics and social sciences and money and all this stuff, and, it seemed like it was all over the place. And I'm trying to figure out how these things connect. For me, that ultimately served me well. I would charge those generations going forward to think at system levels, right? Really how all these pieces work. Because really what's driving is how all these things work together, right? Henry McKoy on my own, John on your own are two individual kind of components, right? If we come together and we collaborate on all this stuff, you do create 1 + 1 is 3. And so I would love to have more of the next generation really think about this from a system level, the challenges that we, how these things connect to one another, because they really are. I early on got introduced to what is known as complexity science, this kind of butterfly effect, right? How do you throw a pebble into the pond and the ripples that comes out of that? So just I say put your head down and do the work, and go back to what I said earlier. When I was teaching, I would always I taught entrepreneurship, and I would always start out with my students. I wouldn't start out with day one to say, well, hey, what business do you want to start, right? The first lesson we had was, what is your passion and purpose, right? What is it that you feel like you were put on this earth to do, and what do you want to do? What drives you? If money was no object, what would you do every day? The second question I said was, what problem in this world do you want to solve? What is that? And then once you get through the passion and purpose and the problem you want to solve, the third thing is, well, based on what your passion and purpose is and what you're trying to achieve, kind of where you at, do assessment where you are at and where you need to get to. And once you do that, once you go through all that, then you can start thinking about, well, what does that look like in the real world? So like I said, I'm certainly a testament to the idea that, it's not always easy. I mean, you're gonna have hills and valleys like anybody else. And you're not gonna always see kind of the end game from where you're standing at, but follow your passion, follow your heart. That's what I encourage my kids to do. At the end of the day, if you follow your heart, you follow your passion, and you still come up short, then at least you feel like you've lived. Whereas if you follow somebody else's path and think, I'm gonna just copy that, then you can get to the end of the road and not be as fulfilled. So I say follow your heart.
One quick follow-up to that, or addition to that, and what do you see, I guess, the role of the business and the voice in the policy intersection in this bigger picture? Because you said it does take a lot of, you got to see the bigger role. And how do you see, businesses in terms of stepping up and going to talk with these local leaders and talking to even our national leaders and raising that voice?
Yeah, so Vicky runs the No Class Sustainable Council. I'll say this, and this is a broad statement, but I think it ties into that. When I was young in banking. I mean, when I was in my 20s, and I didn't even pursue banking, right? I mean, I kind of ended up there, but it ended up being a very, very important aspect of my work, right? Because money has a very important role in how the world operates. But I say that because at the end of the day, part of how I got down this journey was to say, well, if money can cause people to do very bad things in this world, if you put the right values around money, can it get people to do very good things, right? If I say, well, you know what, in order to get this capital, you need to be doing these kind of things. And so I think that, at the end of the day, all this stuff goes together. I mean, access to capital. I mean, we see how money's flying into the political realm, policy and all these kind of things. The Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure, all that stuff didn't come out of the blue one day, right? There've been people working on this stuff for decades, and it's all of a sudden when the planets align, you got this office and that office, it gets passed. And so I encourage people to work hard even when, the planets aren't aligned, so that when the planets do align, that you can, you can make sure that you're ready to put forth those policy prescriptions, all that kind of stuff. And then beyond that, I mean, I think we just have to do everything we can to push the next generation to say that you can have businesses that make an impact on the world, positive ways that make the world a better place, and push them to hold our politicians accountable, and to do that work. So.
Thank you.
I want to wrap this up by saying thank you so much, Henry, for sharing your passion and your purpose with us, sharing your expertise and your inspiration with all of us. And thank you, Malhar, for your expert moderating and representing that vision of the future, right, of impact work, and the future of really, right, how we're thinking about how we can address these great challenges. You and our students, our alumni here, give me hope. And I want to say thank you for sharing that vision of the Triangle as a hub, right, of innovation and impact. I do think that there's an incredible breadth of work happening, right, across our academic institutions. We have so much, right, that we are collaborating on, that we have an opportunity to connect around. The business community that's come out today and that's engaged, right, in this conversation, policymakers, government. And I hope that we will be ready when those stars align, right? All this incredible work that's happening in this room and beyond, that's represented through everything that we're featuring here with Energy Week at NC State and across our community. I think we'll be ready when that happens. And so thanks everybody for coming out. Great conversation. I hope you'll stick around. We've got lunch, I believe, lunch right outside. And so to continue this conversation there. But yeah, thanks again, both great opportunity and critical conversation.
And
Yes.
if I could just say, I'm sorry, so just a shameless plug. So I am Sarah Hall with the Institute for Emerging Issues. We put on an annual Emerging Issues Forum focused on the state's economic competitiveness. This coming February, we are focusing on the state's future energy infrastructure. And so anyways, if you want to continue that conversation, February 19th, I have some save the date cards, but I thought I would be interested and would love to see them.
Sarah. All right, thanks again. Please stick around, grab some food, all right?
I know.
I know, we could, yeah, we could do
Let me talk to you, see if I can learn a little bit more.
I didn't know seniors over across the pond at UNC. I mean, you don't have to.
No, I do. Okay. My dad does not like to do. My mom never did. I don't really know.
I want to say first I want to and secondly, I want to extend offer. And we started talking about sales engineering. I figured definitely worth the second check. So, like, this is like a card. You have to pull out your phone and I've got a card for you. See if this works. Will this work? Is it okay? Is it okay?
I've got a bunch of other meetings, so you gotta hike that.
My friends, parents started a company in 2001 for food toy installation. They just sold their minute. And I work with a couple of engineers out of San Francisco, but software guys, one of whom went to UNC, I lived with for Alumni, and our company builds AI tools for helping solar installers find great customers. So we're a website.
Let's take some time to talk after you kind of.
Filter a big parcel.
I don't know, I was just
Lead gen, like the top of the marketing funnel. We're just trying to get the best concept. Yeah. Send me a text and I'll come back to Raleigh next time I'm around here. My parents still live here. They both want to stay. So, but yes.
We need to get Eric, come on, Eric.
Thank you very much. I understand how well.
Thank you,
Thanks for coming out, man. Looking good.
Appreciate it. Okay.
It's gotta be crazy watching it right now. Oh my God. You got one part which means they don't even talk about climate change. And it's just like right there in your face. Oh,
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Nice. That's pretty cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I saw the smoke information.
It's okay.
Well, thank you so
Yeah, I appreciate
Please do.
Kind of pull our national lab together in a way that have meetings long I've done so that demonstrates
That's super possible.
It's not just about higher ed, like pipeline, learning about.
I think it takes a little bit of bending the rules of the life.
We need to get you some money. All right.
I'm gonna do it soon, so I'm a senior.
You might have like 10. Like,
I didn't say that.
We met a long time ago. I'm working with different stuff.
Yeah, it's being in a couple of super smart engineers and the most brilliant business guy.
It didn't work.
Research project school, a little charter school, like crazy. I go back there and talk to their finance, personal finance.
I'm waiting to learn.
Answer questions.
Gotta act.
It's like very.
Sorry,
I almost have to like dissuade people. I'm like, this is not what you. It's not what you see. Exactly.
We've already talked.
I mean, that's why I do.
Supply chain. I want to run down a little bit. So that iteration. Yeah, I'm excited. But now we're trying to little changes. They got built back. Yeah, we're. Yeah, I was there. Yeah, yeah.
So that's just a thought, it requires understanding how things interact, right? I don't know, I've been in so, 10 years.
Your turn, I'll be like one to two chatter. Enjoy your presentation. So I'm with the Foundation Technology Center. Yeah. He did something else, so.
It's easier when there's less
Yeah, that's what I was asking about. Will that be something? Okay, because what we thought about this, we could put some of the state, federal level person. So, and I run this conference, so that's why I'm saying. And I see, it gets me to know what. So, it'd be okay to reach out to you. Right. Well, we can accommodate. We like the first thing. I'll talk with you. We have our big plan committee. I know if you're available. We had the governor. Not last year.
If they're being placed or.
That was a whole thing, security and stuff. We tried to get them for 2 or 3 years, but it was always.
So.
Not good at that happening in the state, whether weather or something else. Patient process. I've been there 50 years. I've been there a long time. Yeah. Great to meet you. I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Hey, nice to see you. So I took a year off. And I also work with Jenkins on a startup
Yes.
to build tools for solar installers to help find prospects. And that's why I wanted to bring that to you, because you were talking about using data analytics for accelerating deployment and making that easier. That's exactly the work that we do for installers. Yeah, exactly. I mean, can't fall too far off the tree. I studied geography, so I'm doing more of the GIS